Hi, I am Professor Amitav Banerjee. I am an expert in public health, social medicine, and epidemiology. And today I'll be discussing one book which I am reading, and I found it so fascinating, and and I found the theme of the book relates to the present times also. So this is the book. I will introduce the book. This is the book Smoke and Ashes by Amitav Ghosh. This writer, he captures, this book is about the opium trade and the dominion of the Western powers, particularly the Britishers on Asia, Southeast Asia, China, and India, how they used the opium trade to their advantage and generated great revenue. And this author reminds me of V.S. Naipaul, another great author who was, of course, remotely of Indian origin, but he was from West Indies, settled in UK. And V.S. Naipaul, he used to write about this colonial dynamics because West Indies also was a colony of the Britishers. So, and almost more than 2 decades ago, when I used to read his book, I had predicted he will get the Nobel Prize one day, and he did get it after my prediction couple of years later. In fact, I had just told the librarian from where I used to borrow his books. And this time also, I think Amitav Ghosh also captures the dynamics of the colonial rule. And I also think that one day he also may get the Nobel Prize because what message he conveys from his writings are almost universal and almost eternal. Uh, because this the power dynamics from the colonial times, when I connect it with the present times, I think the dynamics remain the same. Only the characters have changed. I will be explaining what I mean from first. The theme of this book is about the Britishers when they came to India in the 17th, 18th century, and before that, the Dutch had also come. So they generated revenue by trade, the East India Company, and first they most of the revenues dependent on two plants. First is tea, and subsequently poppy seeds, the opium. So it started with tea uh, in the 17th or 18th century, around 1700s, 1800s. When they came, the Britishers, they found that the greatest exporter of tea was China globally. And they, China from the tea went to the UK and European countries, and it found a very great market for tea, and it generated a lot of revenue. So the British East India Company used to buy tea from the Chinese and export it to Europe, and they used to generate a lot of revenue. And in return for tea, they used to pay by silver. They had some silver. They had some silver mining using slaves in some parts of the world. But after some time, the silver supply was uh, interrupted, and they found a way out of paying for the tea by exchanging opium from India. Some poppy cultivation was they found poppy cultivation in parts of India, particularly Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal, that was used as a tonic. The local people used it, and then they found a rich market for this in China. So they started sending opium, and after some time, they the tea generated so much revenue that the Britishers they thought that it would be good if they could cultivate the tea in India. But of course, they could not get the uh, know-how of how to carry on with the plantation, and from the Chinese, they did not reveal. However, they went around this barrier by bribing some Chinese people at the lower level, by officials, and getting some tea plantation know-how. And they started this tea plantation in India. And even now there are great tea plantations, huge tea plantations in Assam, Darjeeling, other parts of India. And that so much revenue was generated from this tea and exporting all over the world, that the Britishers could, with just from profits from tea, they could sustain their colonial army. So they could sustain the colonial army. And then they found a rich, in the 1800s, they found a rich market for opium. Lot of profitable year from exporting opium to China. And they established two opium factories in India, one in Patna and the other in Ghazipur, Uttar Pradesh, that is about 40 kilometers from the Banaras. And huge plant, Ghazipur plant is almost 93 acres, and one plant in Patna, and they started the cultivating the opium. Opium cultivation then subsequently to final product requires processing. And these two plants were able to provide the opium to be sent to China. And but after some time, I think in the 1800s, mid 1800s, early 1800s, or even in 1729 or something, the Chinese dynasty, royal dynasty, I think Qing dynasty, Qing, Qing dynasty had restrictions on this. They found the people getting it has having an adverse effect on the population. So they wanted to restrict the entry of opium. And they subsequently, I think in 1800s, early 1800s, they banned the opium and trade officially, the Chinese dynasty. And the Britishers, they bypassed this, and uh, by sending the opium to their some private dealers in Calcutta, and from there these people smuggled it into China. So it reached the people of China, the household, by the private agents, some middlemen. And on one hand, they were uh, getting lot of revenue from this very lucrative opium trade, became very lucrative for the Britishers. And they were also exploiting the Indians, natives, local cheap Indian labor, in particularly in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, Patna and Ghazipur. They were told to cultivate opium only, not the crops of their choice. And they were getting very little in return by the Britishers. They totally exploited the natives, and they did not share the profits with them. They just used the labor, and all the revenue was sustaining the British colonies, maintenance of the British colonies, the British armies. And to that extent, the opium department became a huge department during the British rule. It became a very huge, very great policy, and the biggest factory in Ghazipur. And opium had a lot of medicinal use also, and it still has medicinal use. In fact, the requirement of opium for medicinal use, like for painkillers, anesthetics, analgesics, is always there. But being a strong drug, it has got an addictive liability. And in fact, even today, in modern times, even America is facing an opioid crisis. Is facing an opioid crisis. What this, and by the way, while the Britishers were exploiting the opium trade through China, the Americans also entered the fray. in 1783, I think the Americans, they also found a very lucrative opium business into the Asian and Southeast Asia region. And through Turkey, they cultivated the opium, and some of the biggest families which in America, or they became big because of the profits. And some of the big names and number of big business, it included the President Roosevelt's, Franklin Roosevelt's wife's grandfather, that is Warren Delano Jr. He was one of the persons who made rich profits, and he became very rich, one of the millionaire or billionaire those times. And it was a very lucrative business. And of course, not many of them, Americans, they became very rich by this opium trade. And only difference is that they have a full details. The Americans have a full details, and who all profited, whereas the Britishers, there's nothing on record amount of money they made, but they sustained the whole and colonial armies. And in the meantime, there was a lot of resistance from the Chinese dynasty, Qing dynasty, for opium. And illegally they were pushing opium. The Britishers were pushing opium through the private dealers into China. So they did arrest some people, and the British, some officials also, the Chinese rulers. And that led to two opium wars. The Britishers attacked through their strong navy, and they won the war. There was one war, and following another decade, another war. The Opium Wars, they are known as the Opium Wars. Two Opium Wars, and they had a very strong navy because they were, after all, with the money earned through exploiting the Indian labor and selling the opium and the tea. So they had a lot of resources, and with those resources, they could win two opium wars. And in the process, they also captured Hong Kong, and it became a British colony, the Hong Kong also. And that Hong Kong became the launching pad for the subsequent opium business. And number of treaties, two treaties. After each victory, they made the Chinese sign the treaty. And the second treaty, first Opium War, second Opium War, both Opium Wars was won by the Britishers, and they made them sign the treaty, and which almost legalized this opium business. So this was the how the powers, I mean, whichever the power dynamics, how they dictate the priorities. And when all this was going on, they claimed, and Western powers and the Britishers, the Americans, who were making huge profits from this opium, and the Britishers were also the one who started this modus operandi by exploiting the natives and creating a demand in China. And then they rationalized it by saying that it is the demand is there, that's why we are meeting a demand. And this Amitav Ghosh also mentions in his book about this opium business. After that, he also lightly touches about the same methods used by the tobacco industry, by just making it penetrate the populations for profit, and then rationalizing that there's a demand, we are supplying the demand. So why am I talking about this? And as I said in the beginning, it rung a bell, what we are seeing in present times. The whole world is becoming very unhealthy. And this unhealthy is like those right 200 years back, and it is now still continuing. The opium made the people dependent. Large populations became dependent, and there are some people who made all the profit, including big families in USA. The whole British Empire made a lot of profit from this opium, and they uh, made large populations dependent, created a demand. So why I am saying ki nothing has changed. The power dynamics are there. Only the players have changed. I am seeing this. Everybody, if you see what is happening today, people are making profit. Now, if you say those days the Britishers made profit from two plants, the tea and opium, and Gazipur factory is still existing. As on today, also Gazipur is there. But as I said, opium is also required for positive uses also. For it has a use in medicine and other. But now other things have also come. The players have changed. There are, like I said about the treaty, war may person, the treaty is made by the victors and they dictate the terms. So treaty is something that somebody puts the conditions and exploits the person with lower in the power hierarchy. So now wars, now we are having now the different type of wars which are so-called declared. And what first came to mind when I read this about the treaties was the WHO pandemic treaty, which has been proposed by the WHO after this so-called pandemic. And these conditions are put by the WHO and the world government. And one thing I forgot to mention when I mentioned about the tea, when they bribed some officials, Chinese officials, and they got the wherewithals how to cultivate tea, and they made the Indian laborers cultivate tea, and then they made profit from tea. Similarly, now also there are people who are creating like the WHO, which is an unelected body. It has just nominated, they are not unelected. The members and those country representatives, they are also nominated. They actually do not represent the country. They are handpicked people from government officials or WHO officials, and they have their own conflicts of interest. As on today, the WHO is having lot of influence of the pharma industry. One can call it something like the tea industry or opium industry on those days, and they get their own pound of flesh. If they play the ball, WHO, they will get their own pound of flesh. And these are the people who have drafted the treaty, which is may be exploiting the population ill health. Population is made unhealthy. Like you made the British colonies 200 years back, they made the people dependent on opium. The World Health Organization for the past few decades, it is not doing anything to promote health. The health requires control. So one is the opium industry. For opium industry, one can read the pharma industry. Opium was a drug. These are many drugs and the vaccines and all. Other is the tea. For tea, you can replace it with the food industry. That is the ultra processed food. So these, as on today, the dynamics are promotion of ultra processed foods, and these ultra processed foods are as addictive as opium because it has got high sugar content, high salt content, and a lot of say coloring agents and other things, and a lot of reagents which we do not know the exact composition because they are engineering products. And now America is trying to curb this ultra processed foods and color dyes and other things, but there is a lot of pushback because there are a lot of entrenched vested interests. And all countries have their own sycophants of these powers who control the pharma industry and the food industry. The food industry and the pharma industry, they have got the lobbying. They have got the officials in all important positions. So they are the new power, and these power dynamics are very strong nowadays, and they are working through the WHO in the name of health. And understanding these dynamics, probably USA has separated from the WHO, and Argentina has separated. But majority of the country are going with the WHO for this treaty. This treaty has got a lot of provisions where, like when if you take the same example of opium, when the Chinese dynasty objected to opium trade, it was forced on them by the Opium Wars, and they were made to sign treaty. They took Hong Kong and they almost legalized the export of opium to China by force. The same thing is in the provisions of the WHO pandemic treaty. There are provisions for vaccine mandates. There are provisions for vaccine passports in the name of a pandemic, which the WHO can declare anytime it feels like. So once it declares, they will be like they had opium agent all over the place. They will have the country agents and reps. They will try to see that the guidelines is binding on the countries. Any house can be entered in the name of a surveillance of for pandemic. People can be tested against their consent. People found positive can be taken away for isolation against their consent. People can be injected with anything against the consent, which will undermine your base. It will be forced by the pharma industry, which is working hand in glove with WHO. First, the ultra processed food industry is making people unhealthy, even all over the world. Western countries are facing an obesity crisis. And you have made people obese, and then you are offering them quick solutions like anti-obesity drugs and other pharmaceutical agents, pharmaceutical solutions to which could be controlled by healthy lifestyle. So healthy lifestyle is not being promoted. The ultra processed unhealthy foods are being promoted, and to cope with the impact of these unhealthy foods, the people are being made dependent on pharmaceutical products. People are being made dependent on number of jabs, and everybody gets a pound of flesh in this, including the scientists and academicians, because they get any new disease conditions, say obesity medicine is coming up, or any new pandemic is declared, the hundreds of viruses can be picked up by the scientists, and they will get grant, and they will get huge grants, and those viruses can be projected to cause the next pandemic. And the jabs will be ready, the vaccines will, the pharma industry will work and hand in glove with the WHO. There will be anybody who will question, no questioning, like the Chinese dynasty was no questioning war. So instead of war, now they have got a treaty without a war, because nowadays it is you don't have to physically fire a ammunition, you can information war. You see, any virus can be raised to the level of panic just by information war. Scientists get grants, academicians get grants to promote a virus as a deadly. The media gets grants. So media is the new weapon. Today we are in the information age, so they don't have to come and conquer your land. They just conquer your minds through the information age. Just like they conquered land, the Britishers and the Western powers had to come, and then they used the opium and to generate revenue. So now it is much easier. Now we involve the people, you involve the key stakeholders and take them handpicked. In academics, they can be stakeholder. In science, they can be stakeholders. They will get the pound of flesh from these to promote the pharmaceutical agents, to promote the ultra processed. No effort to stop this ultra processed food, pharmaceutical solutions, and this has become a billion-dollar industry, much more profits than the opium trade, much more. And this is, and unfortunately, this may people may lose trust in it, because just like even today, opium has got its uses, it has its advantages, and it has its benefits. It's a very important medicinal plant. Similarly, there are any number of pharmaceuticals which are very useful and it has saved lives. It is going to save lives if used judiciously. But now it is being used for profit. Like opium was supposed to be a tonic or a mild soothing agent, but for profit, it was promoted at the great cost to the health of the people. Similarly, now pharmaceuticals and too many vaccines are being promoted not for the welfare of mankind, but for the great profit, great profit. So this I found the similarities in this. I think if it requires, I am just loud thinking because I found the same dynamics, like two plants now, the two pharma products and food products. So present day, the players have changed. Like earlier, it was continents and countries and west and east. Now, because of globalization, we have got people who are the brown sahibs, one can call them. They have got, for all practical purposes, they are with the West as long as they are getting the pound of flesh, or they may not be knowing also that they are working towards this. They are getting profit, they are getting good career. So this all are happening. These dynamics are driven by profit, not because of it. And genuine health problems are neglected, like sanitation, good food, healthy lifestyle, control of ultra processed food. So these are was my loud thinking today. I would be happy to get some feedback. I may be off the mark. I just trying to my ideas may not be very focused, but just some feedback if I get, I can refine these ideas. So thank you for